Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Watch Club, the April edition, coming to you from the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival, north of Boston. I am Program Director James Sullivan. Many of you may know that April is Autism Acceptance Month, and we were delighted this month to present a special virtual screening of Let Me Be Me, which is a film that really moved me and hopefully moved some of you, about Kyle Westphal and Kyle's family. Kyle is a young man who grew up with autism, an autism diagnosis, and discovered that his passion was for fabric and fashion design, and is continuing to make that his career. So, just in case you haven't, so the idea of the Watch Club is that we recommend a film every month for you to watch and then invite you back to join a conversation with the director. Co-director of Let Me Be Me, Katie Tabor, and Kyle Westphal are with us tonight, and I will introduce them in a moment. Just in case some of you watching have not had a chance yet to actually watch the film, we're going to go ahead and roll the trailer, and then we'll be back with our two guests. Steve, let's see the trailer. Let Me Be Me.
My world was quiet to myself, my own thoughts, that this great fascination was spinning. Let all the world go away, then I feel okay.
He would not react to what's going on around him.
Dives down under blankets all day long.
I can't pick him up. He kicks and screams.
Back then, autism meant there's nothing you can do, and they have to go into an institution. It was a really dark time.
Most autism treatments focus on changing behavior.
Rather than forcing them to join a world that's not comprehensible to them, we go into their world.
Motivating the children so they themselves want to change.
Come out, come on, hi!
Let's make a house!
Most of the time, you're trying to let go and just join him.
For lots of other people, what we were doing was pretty weird.
Then you see him just look at you. That's different.
But then one day, he just woke up and he was like, let's go.
Hi, my name is Kyle.
When I was younger, Cinderella was my favorite movie ever. I was obsessed. I was talking with my mom about the dress. I was trying to explain, this is what you need to do to create this dress to feel special. You need to spin and twirl, and you'll create this magic.
That's when you started drawing.
I started doing fashion shows in my backyard, drawing a lot, designing t-shirts. It was an amazing time. Fashion was like a whole new world for me. And that's where it all started clicking. I was like, this is all making sense.
Better.
Yeah.
He could say, oh yeah, this reminds me of a Versace from 2010 from the spring line. And I would just look at him and think, you've got to be kidding me. How do you remember that?
My creative process, how I design, is my number one asset from me being autistic.
This soft elegance, so well captured.
When I was a kid, this would have seemed impossible.
We were almost like his bodyguards. He might be weird, but he's our weird, and he's our brother. He's our weird brother.
I used to use fabric as a way to hide myself, but now it's become a way for me to show myself.
I don't think I knew how to love somebody until we got on the floor with Kyle here. This is kind of where we learned how to accept somebody for who they were.
Just by existing, Kyle has changed the lives of so many people.
Everyone's on their own journey. I just want to be me.
So you just met Kyle, and here he is, Kyle Westphal. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, James. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
And co-director Katie Tabor is also with us tonight. Hi, Katie. How are you?
Hello. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Katie has some fun projects in the works that she just told me about, but we won't go into that. We're going to talk about Let Me Be Me. For starters, Kyle, I think I have two specific questions for you. For those who have watched the film. Do you still occasionally approach people and say by saying bippity boppity boo?
I do not really, but I think when I look at someone and I can tell their essence of who they are, and I can get inspired by that. And I think, when you meet those people, you can kind of, you hope that they become angels in your life. So I think, it's not an in life bibbidi bobbidi boo. It's more of a, in your head kind of, giving a little wish to someone. So, but I appreciate the question.
That was a goofy question, and you just gave the most beautiful answer.
You really did, Kyle.
Thank you. No, I was like, baby I boo, it's like a little magic wish. So I was like, well, that's like an aura. So I was like, let's just play with it, right? So
yeah. So as a kid, you did that a lot. Yeah. And the other question is, you meant also in the film, you mentioned you called your brother and his like sort of neighborhood friends the Leave It to Beaver gang, and you are not nearly old enough to remember Leave It to Beaver, which was sort of my favorite show to watch when I was a kid. But I'm just wondering how you know about Leave It to Beaver.
Well, I think I think the context was, I think my dad, he loved to show us films from childhood. And so I think, the question, that term sort of came from sort of like Leave It to Beaver, Stand By Me, that kind of group of young adolescent kids, especially boys. And so it's what the word came to me, and that's how it came out. So
yeah, exactly.
It's a fantastic line.
Yes. Right. So Katie, you made this film with Dan Crane, right? And I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about how the project came together and how the two of you met Kyle's mom, who I think was most instrumental from Kyle's family in getting this film made.
Yeah.
How did the film get put together? How did you and Dan get connected with the family?
Well, it's a very complicated story, like most films are, but I would say that, and I'm sure Kyle would agree, this one has even more various streams of complication. But, and interestingly, Dan and I are co-directors on the film, but we were not really in an intensive working relationship. And I'll kind of explain a little bit about how things shook down. So Jen Westphal, Kyle's mom, who was also a producer on the film, she always, or for many, many years had a feeling that there was a story that would be helpful to people, in Kyle's story. Everybody who kind of goes through an autism journey, it's so unique to every family, but she did feel like there was, something in her family's story that could be of interest, could be a balm, could be inspirational to other people. So she had, a film crew had started filming Kyle when he was in fashion school at Drexel. I was not a part of that team. There was about 9 months, basically his senior year, that there was a film team that was following him. There was a short kind of film that was cut down from some of that footage that had a lot of potential, but it didn't really quite sing as a full feature-length film. But it had a lot of great stuff in there. So it was on her mind to figure out sort of what the next steps might be. I came to know Jen through then another documentary colleague, and sat down and had a meal with her that was a very sort of transformational meal. We immediately kind of clicked into both of our shared sensibility that this was a story that was about radical acceptance, and that is what we really wanted to dive into. I had seen the footage from Kyle's senior year, and I had seen, a selection of the archival material. I hadn't seen, ultimately it was hundreds of hours of archival material, but I had seen sort of a selection of it at that point. I was mesmerized by the archival material. I think that most of us, especially those of us who are parents, even if we don't have a neurodivergent kid, we can look at that archive and it just kind of goes straight to our heart for, that idea of kind of spending time with your kid in that fashion where you are really trying to, be with them where they are. I found very special. So what I felt was missing from what they had was the family participation. Up until that point, there had been no interest and a fair amount of resistance, I think, to the family speaking on camera and the family being part of the filmmaking process in the way they were. So that's kind of the stage that I got very involved in. I started, figuring out how we were going to build out. I always thought of it as kind of this three-legged stool, right? That you have kind of the family element, the fashion element, and this childhood element, and how are you going to balance those things out? So, we proceeded to start filming those interviews. And simultaneously, we were filming with Kyle in New York. So that's, at that point, it's whatever it is, 3 or 4 years out from his time at Drexel.
Right.
And just starting, as any of you documentarians know, it's like, you don't know how these things are go. You're just kind of building up these threads and figuring out how you might try these things. We also then, somewhere in that process, we start editing and we start thinking about how we might incorporate some animation. Some of that first came about just to the idea around filling in some of the holes. We didn't have a lot of footage from his teenage years, for instance, and there were just other spots that it felt like something is missing. And so, we proceeded along that path. And Dan actually came on significantly later and helped us kind of up-level the animation and do some other tweaking on the structure. But we really kind of, I've been in some co-directing relationships where you're just marching side by side and bouncing everything off each other. We were sort of we were like a little more like a relay race,
like a tag team, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. You're tagged in, I'm out, right? Yeah.
Portion and then kind of handing off the baton. And which was great. That also was a great way to work.
Yeah. You mentioned the animation, and Kyle, I would imagine you must have I love the animation. It looks like fabric, right? I mean, that was intentional. It had to be, right? Like, looks like it's crocheted. I mean, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely intentional. I think definitely that was a consensus among the directors, the production, and we brought in grant animators from Yuck Fu, which is a company in New Zealand, who were really fantastic. And they created the sequence and the orange juice, and they were amazing. They were really fabulous. And, to Katie's point, really, the animation just really brought in another fantastic layer that I think was definitely needed. And, but it complemented the film so well. So it was, it wasn't neat in the sense where it was like, if you didn't have the animation, like, you wouldn't have the film. Everything just complemented each other so well. And so that's what I think really made it fantastic.
And I feel like that animation really, became obviously our part of the window into Kyle's imagination. It just allows us to take that extra leap with him.
Yeah. Right. Radical acceptance, Katie. That's the phrase you use. That's such a great, I love that phrase. It's really good. I meant to say, and didn't think of it in the intro, that congratulations on being Emmy nominated. The film was nominated for an Emmy last year, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry?
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it was a really fantastic experience.
So before we came on live, I asked Kyle this. The film's been out for a little while. Often enough, those of you who are involved with, whether you're in front of the camera or behind it, a documentary gets made, you spend some time promoting it, talking about it, getting invited to film festivals, special screenings, and then everybody goes away, right? And you're still talking about it. And Kyle, we're really grateful that you were willing to join us. And I asked you this, and I'm going to ask you again for the viewers.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's kind of your duty to continue to help promote the film or talk about it whenever you can, because it's not just your story, but it's a story about a lot of families who go through similar situations to what your family went through in while you were coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, James. I think for me, being able to tell a story and getting the chance to tell a story and can be able to continue telling the story, it's fantastic. And I'm excited that I have the opportunity to do it. And, every time I do a Q&A or a screening, I always learn something new. And so just about the process and just about, having these conversations, and, it's a fantastic thing. So I really appreciate the invite. So thank you.
So let's catch folks up on, it's obviously the film was shot over time, and a lot of the scenes of you as an adult were shot a few years ago, clearly at this point.
Yeah.
Where are you now? So those who watch the film know that you were in New York for a little while, but you told me before you're no longer in New York. What are you doing now?
No, that's a great question. So I'm back in the Philadelphia area, and it's been great. I've been back a couple years, and it's been really a journey. It's been a great journey. I've realized a lot of things. I figured out that I had OCD, and that was a big thing that I was dealing with for a while. So I took some time to really take care of my mental health. I really, got focused and I got grounded and, found, sort of, realizing that Philly is the place for me and put some permanent roots, which is really fantastic. And I'm working on a couple things, but we'll see as they come. So it's a little surprise. So we'll see. So kind of keep people a little bit guessing, James.
Katie
so
has surprises about the films that are coming up for her. You have surprises about your career. I'm sorry to hear that you got diagnosed with OCD. It seems like that. I mean, so I mentioned to you both earlier that we have autism in my family, and for some reason, I think OCD and autism diagnoses go hand in hand often enough, right?
There seems to be, at least from what I've seen, and there seems to be a consensus that there is some overlap, and there is some, but not always. But it seems that there tends to be quite a connection between the two, and so it's been fascinating to learn about a different part of your brain. And so I'm no medical expert, but I think it's really it's been a cool. Well, I wouldn't say cool. Just, anyone who's dealt with OCD, it's like so fun. Not really. But you're sort of like, so I think it's cool now that I've gone through the treatment and the route, figuring that stuff out, to kind of see how both sides overlap, and sort of also, and more of the past in terms of like sort of how the OCD connects into sort of my past experience with the spectrum and sort of those layers. And so that's been kind of interesting to observe.
Right. But there must have been a moment where, a doctor said, guess what, Kyle, you have another thing to contend with, where you must have been like, I spent, most of my growing up years dealing with the fact that I was born with autism. You're telling me now that I have another thing a condition that I have to deal with. I mean, it couldn't have been a fun thing to hear.
Well, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because there we go. Yes. I'm glad you brought that up because, for me, it's interesting, a lot of my experience with autism is really, I feel like a lot of it's really in my past. It's really, I sometimes use when I'm being creative, when I'm thinking about a collection, I sometimes go into a space that's very reminiscent of it, but I'm consistently making a choice to kind of go back into that space where I know I can choose the opposite. So it's not something that I feel like I'm permanently stuck in. It's almost like playing with a childhood toy. Like if you picked it up from a toy chest, you're kind of like, oh, this was so fun to like, when I was 4, to like play with like action figures or Barbies. And now it's like, oh, this is so fun. But then you're like, okay, I got to like actually do stuff, and I got to like live my life and like figure out how to pay bills and, figure out how to, be an adult. So I can put those toys sort of back in the toy chest and then put them back sort of in storage or where they're sort of stored. Yeah. And so that's sort of how I feel about autism. And so, but OCD was sort of a great layer because it was also another question. It was another question mark that got answered. And so I was glad that I got that answer.
Right. Katie, do you mind if I ask you, do you have, before you made this film, did you have any personal experience with someone on the spectrum?
Not directly in my immediate family. We do have folks in a more extended family that are on the spectrum. We have, in my more immediate family, we have some other neurodivergent, issues. And, when I started the film, my kids were pretty young, actually. And that was part of feeling so, and were challenging. Like I had my young son was quite challenging, different issues, but he did have a lot of sensory stuff. And I could, I said how moved I was by watching the archival footage. And certainly those things hit close to home. But I also could really see how it's like, oh, they hit close to home, but wow, this is going to resonate with so many different kinds of people with different experiences. But no, I did. But just one more point. It's like I did, for me, this very much was a journey also of learning much more of the specifics, and particularly on the history of treatment and stuff was not something that I came into this project knowing about at all. So that was all new information for me.
Yeah. And Kyle, it would have been new information for you in a lot of ways, right? Because we all know, I think at this point, anybody who has, autism in their families or whatever, and even people who don't at this point, because of things like Autism Acceptance Month, I think more folks know today, what it means to have autism than even just 20 years ago or so. And a lot of that stuff in the beginning of the film about the archival footage and the ideas about how autism was being treated when Kyle was a kid are so different than the treatments were even just 10 or 20 years prior to that, and certainly 50 years prior to that. So Kyle, it must have been eye-opening for you to see through the eyes of the filmmakers that, if you had been born 20 years earlier, the way you would have been, your childhood would have been treated would have been drastically different, and negatively so, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing too to see, it's really, it's a whole new generation that's really getting a whole unique, like newer experience. And so it's a whole, I mean, the fact that there's more awareness, acceptance, more information, more people with siblings, and I think we're really seeing an age where it's there's just it's a much more known thing. And so I think there's I think it's been an incredible experience to kind of see that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't said this yet, but for those of you who are watching, if anybody has any questions for Kyle and or Katie, by all means, type in a question in the chat, and our producer Steve will feed them to me if we get a chance to pose them. So, Katie, I think that there are several moments in this film that are kind of like the aha moments. I mean, every film project has those, right? Like, it was, interesting to rewatch the trailer and see that, a bunch of them are in, the ones that I went, oh, right. That's a moment where the filmmakers went, oh, that's gold. That's going in the film, right? Can you tell me a little bit about your memories of a couple of those things coming up where you, like, as soon as you were seeing it happen in real life, you knew, oh, this is going to be a hinge point for this whole film?
Well, it's interesting. It was interesting, the trip that we took to the old house with Kyle's dad, Jeff, that is in the trailer. It's funny because I look back, my editor, who was, brilliant woman, she had kept I was taking the trips down to Philadelphia to be doing these, filming with the family, and I was back and forth a few times. She was the one who's like, I think you got to go to the old house. And for some reason, I had been a little resistant to it. I don't know why, but eventually I was like, okay, we'll go to the old house. And Kyle's mom, Jen, was just like, no, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. But Jeff was like, okay, we can do it. And, it's just one of those, and it's the thing where they don't live there anymore. You reach out to the family that's living there. It's, it's kind of a whole ordeal. Right. But, as soon as we stepped into the house, it was like, Jeff's entire physical demeanor changes. You can just, see the flood of memory. Like you can just, it's like so radically different than having someone in a chair for an interview. Right.
Yeah.
So, that certainly was one of those moments. There's also just like, in the filming that we did with Kyle in New York, even though the New York section is, fairly sort of short in the film, I feel like, there's just these sparks. I mean, that wonderful moment when he's getting dressed with his friend Alexis, she's in that fabulous red dress, and just these, you really see those two come alive. And I just love some of those moments like that.
Right. Kyle, you cracked me up when you said it's like a male corset trying to button the top button on your dress shirt.
Not make them wide enough at all. And so if I ever have a men's line, there'll be wide collars, wide neck openings.
Right.
So the situation needs to be addressed.
Yes.
The other thing, just on like a, not exactly aha moments, but there was, in a film like this, it's a whole process with the family. Like if Jen was on, she would speak even more eloquently about this, but they didn't know what they were getting into. So every iteration of the film, and I mean, I did 5 or 6 major versions of the film that were all quite different, honestly. Like we kept sort of having this collaboration with the family where when they would watch one cut, they would remember new things. Like it would stir up a whole other level of sort of connection and memory that then we could go back and sort of do more interviews or more filming around what the film brought up. So it's one of these it was fascinating, as a filmmaker, because you're like, we are really part of the process of excavating, these years in their lives. And I mean, sometimes that made them, feel very done with me. I'm sure it was like, no, Katie should not come back to the house. But, God bless, we just, kept it going and were able to get where we needed to go.
Well, Kyle, and I can imagine that your siblings in particular maybe were sort of like, oh, great, we still have to work on Kyle's film, right?
That's a good question. I think, I think they could have felt that way. I think, but actually I felt like they were really willing to be open and honest about their experience with me growing up as a sibling. And, and they've always been honest about that. It's not just one thing for the cameras and one thing where it's separate off camera. It's the same thing regardless. And because there was so much, yes, there was times of struggle and there was times where they, had to look out for me. But I think also, I'm sure for them, they had so much fun talking about all the, the fun times or the things that were hilarious that I would do or that they would do. And because we were all growing up together. We were all growing up as siblings. Yes, I was going through this experience with autism, but at the end of the day, it's like all of us kind of grew up together in the same family. So I think they really enjoyed really getting to talk about that experience.
Do you still, so I was going to ask you this before I learned that, you're not in New York anymore. You're back in Philadelphia, but do you occasionally get stopped on the street or in the coffee shop or whatever, and people go, oh, I saw the movie that's about you?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever gotten stopped. I don't think, but, either, if somebody were to stop me and say, that they love the film or et cetera, going off what you're saying, I think I would be honored, and it would be a really a sweet moment and really touching that, hopefully that touched someone's lives. And, the chances are also that, someone may have the opposite experience and they might be willing to say that too. So you never know. So it's really, I always hope for the positive, but, if, maybe one day, knock on wood, we'll see, or my printer in this case, but yeah.
I just noticed that you chose to wear the same color that was the dominant color in your senior project.
Yeah, you're right.
Wow, good eye, James.
That's good eye, James. Yeah.
Well, it's a great color.
Yeah, it's a great color. You're right. Yeah, it's that whole experience of designing my senior collection was really amazing. I had such a great time doing it. And, it was really, it spoke to my experience going to Drexel, and really, I have a lot of family connections at Drexel. The College of Media Arts and Design is named after my grandmother. And so I designed the collection, Letters to Antoinette, as sort of an homage to her, because she passed away in the early 2000s. And so for breast cancer. And, she was an incredible breast cancer advocate, one of the founding board members of breastcancer.org. Really, passionate,
Wow. That's a story that you didn't even tell. I mean, that's a different story, but
yeah, she was really fantastic mover and shaker in the Philadelphia community, and very involved in philanthropy. And so I wanted to do that as an homage to her. And so I always imagine her, she was, wherever she is, sort of sitting on an Italian palazzo, having a fabulous glass of red wine, and and so I just wanted to bring in those colors and just that experience. And so sort of that olive green and sort of the hunter green, that sort of really deep green, really, really paid tribute to her in that way. And I actually believe her kitchen actually had that color green on her walls. I do believe.
Well, if it was a house of a certain age, of course it did, right? The shag rug was probably that color.
Maybe, yeah. And she just there was just this really very classic sensibility to her. And so I was just a little bit like Vanessa Redgrave.
Kyle, you would have been like you would have known her when you were a kid, right? Like you got to know her a little bit before she passed away, right?
I knew her quite a bit as a kid because we had
Yeah.
a lot of, because my dad grew up in the Philadelphia area. And so we were, every holidays, a lot of our holidays was spent with my dad's side of the family, occasionally my mom's as well. But, you know, so there was a lot of, you know, my grandmother loved Halloween. So she always did like a Halloween party for us kids. So, you know, I was very fortunate to have a relationship with her. And so I think what was so fun was being able to do this collection, even though she couldn't be there in person, and just like, you know, I felt her spirit a lot of the time, you know, while doing this. I felt like there was such a fun, like playful amount, like it was just an experience that we could sort of do together, sort of post-human in a way.
Yeah.
So it was really fantastic.
Well, that's beautiful. The film is beautiful. You know, for those who are watching who have not yet actually watched the film, I highly recommend it. Thanks so much for joining us, to both of you. It's been a pleasure. Katie, I look forward to talking to you about your next project.
Thank you.
Kyle, we look forward to hearing from you about your next project.
Absolutely.
We'll take a quick moment to thank our sponsors, and we will see you all next month in the Watch Club.
Thank you.